We're back in the Psalms, and we're looking at some imprecatory psalms. What is an imprecatory psalm? Anybody want to offer up a definition or a description? What's that? Imprecatory. Imprecatory. What's it mean to imprecate? These are psalms where the authors are calling on God's justice, or calling for God's justice on those who have been mistreating and abusing either the author or others. So that's what the imprecatory is. It's asking God to come down and smack somebody, essentially, for their misdeeds, to take things into account. And in our world, we have all kinds of agencies who are in charge of law enforcement. We have them locally with the Sheriff's Department and the Highway Patrol and City Police. We've got them in Oklahoma City. We've got just all kinds of agencies that are in charge of enforcing the law. We've got the FBI and all kinds of groups like that. And then internationally, we've got international police, and we've got the military. But in David's day, there weren't so many people looking out to enforce law as there are now. At least that's what history tells us. And so a lot of things were done that shouldn't have been done. And if you enjoy all of the science-laden police shows these days, CSI, where they show you how they get into the forensics and prove that somebody did this. Of course, they always find what they need to find, one tiny little fiber. Oh, this fiber only comes from this part of the woods over here. So whoever's been there is the guy that did it. But they have that stuff, and they find out a lot of things. They didn't have any of that in those days. It was all he said, she said, and that's why the law required how many witnesses? At least 2, but 3 would be better. Billy? Often, yes. Right. Yes. As a matter of fact, just an interesting thought. The 20th century, probably the bloodiest century on record, but who killed the most people in the 20th century? National governments. Stalin was one of them. He represented socialism in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The Chinese killed millions. It's estimated perhaps as many as 70 million of their own people. So wars have been horrible, and famines and diseases have been horrible, but government, as Billy is pointing out, is one of the worst perpetrators of crimes against humanity. And David is calling on God's justice against those who perpetrate this bad stuff. So let's start with Psalm 35, or let's go to Psalm 35. We started last week with Psalm 5, but now this morning we're going to look at Psalm 35. And I need a reader for the first 8 verses. Who wants to read this morning? The first 8 verses. All right, PJ. First 8, 1 through 8.
And the battle axe to meet those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let those be ashamed and dishonored who seek my life. Let those be turned back and humiliated who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind. Let the angel of the Lord drive with the angel of the Lord driving them on. Let their way be dark and slippery with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. For without cause they hid their net from me. Without cause they dug a pit for my soul. Let destruction come upon him unawares, and let the net which he had to catch himself. Into that very destruction let him fall.
Why is it different to call on God for justice rather than human agency for justice? Or is it different? Okay, we don't feel worthy perhaps of God's justice, and yet do we feel worthy of justice? Who doesn't?
God knows what's really going on and what's in man's heart.
All right,
So men can misinterpret other people's actions.
right.
God knows the intent of their heart. So if he metes out justice, what looks like justice to us, or punishment, then they really deserve it. Whereas we can punish people because of bad information.
Right. Or bad judgments based on information that might even have been accurate. Human systems are flawed because humans are flawed. But when you call on God, you know that God already knows everything. He knows the entire situation. He knows what I've done. He knows what they've done. He knows who needs to get what. And so when you call on God for justice, you're calling on someone who's not going to, at your behest, do something wrong to somebody else that they don't deserve. You're calling on someone whom you can trust. You can pour out your heart and soul, so to speak, and know that they're going to respond in a way that's righteous and just, regardless of what you think and what you ask. And so when David is calling on God, look at some of the language he uses here. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of buckler and shield. What's a buckler? It's a small shield. It's one like you strap on your arm and you parry away blows. And the shield is much larger. You might cover your entire body or most of your body with a shield. Rise up for my help. Draw also the spear and the battle axe to meet those who pursue me. What do you do with a spear or a battle axe? You kill people. That's what they're for. That's the whole point. Do you remember Phinehas? When the Israelites were sinning and one of the Israelites brought in a Midianite woman, and Phinehas went into the tent where they had gone and he killed them both with his spear. And I like to jest and say, because that was the Christian thing to do. See, when Christ came along, he taught us to love our enemies. But is this anti-loving our enemies? How do they come together? Can you love your enemies and still pray for justice? I think so. I don't see any problem with that. Because you have to. Who is the injustice being done to in this case? It's being done to David, the author. But I'm sorry?
God's chosen person also. God's people injustice. And usually that's what it is. It's injustice towards God's people, to Christians, those with faith, and whatever. And not always, but more likely so than not. It's injustice to Christians.
And he doesn't yet at this point describe what's been done to him. But do you imagine that this is some personal slight that somebody, he just didn't speak to, I was over there and he didn't even say boo to me. Do you think that's what this is about, or do you think it's something more than that? Of course, at this point, it's speculation because we don't know what's been done. But I'm making the assumption because David had enemies. How many times did Saul try to kill David? It's recorded at least 3 times he tried to kill him. What about Absalom? Who was Absalom? Absalom was his son. What did Absalom try to do? Tried to kill him so that he could take over and have the kingdom for himself. David had all kinds of enemies that were not just the kind of enemies we typically think of having, who are people who just say nasty things about us or who shortchange us somehow when we're not looking. David had enemies who were trying to kill him. And so he's calling on God for justice, and very possibly in fear of his own life. Now, if you've ever been in that situation where you fear for your life, you fear for your security, then you're going to be calling on somebody, and there's no better one to call on than Almighty God. And so that's what David is showing us here. And God has chosen to have these Psalms incorporated and preserved in the Psalms for us. How old are these Psalms? This particular Psalm, about how old would it be? We're looking at almost 3,000 years. Because David lived prior to 900 BC. Perhaps closer to 1,000 BC. So we're looking at some old writings, but that we can still relate to today. Let's see, verse 6. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. What's the angel of the Lord done before? He's brought vengeance. Pretty wicked. Well, not wicked in the sense of evil wicked, but in the figurative sense. Powerful wicked. Without cause, they hid their net for me. What does that mean? Dug a pit for my soul. They're setting traps. They're premeditatedly setting traps. It's not like you just bump into somebody and they're mean to you or ugly to you. They're setting out to do David harm, and so he's calling on God. One of the reasons I'm bringing this out is so that we don't go home and say, well, my neighbor lets his grass grow too much. It makes the whole neighborhood look bad. Lord, why don't you call down lightning on this guy and wipe him out because he doesn't mow his grass as often as I think he should, or whatever. No. I've wondered if my neighbors thought, how come he didn't fix those mole holes in his yard or those gopher holes, and said, because I knock them down and they come back up the next day. It was great though. Jamie, you know Jamie? We live a couple of houses from each other, and between us are the Bullards, wonderful couple. And our gophers almost invariably come up in their yard as well. Well, she was out with the kids the other day, and they were just playing, having a big time. They've got 5, and this gopher started throwing his dirt out of the hole. If you've ever seen him do that in our yard, she saw it, so she ran and got their trap and just shoved that trap right down over that hole where that gopher was, and she caught him. And I've been trying to catch that dumb gopher for 2 weeks in a crazy wooden box trap, and he'd fill up the hole. So, well, yeah, juicy fruit. Maybe that's what it was. Some guy said, use Tootsie Rolls. No, wait a minute. That was from ice. Juicy fruit to attract them to the trap?
No, don't use a trap. Just use juicy fruit. They chew it. They can't digest it. It comes up their system and they die.
Well, that's mean. Yeah, really. Wow. Juicy fruit. Well, yeah? All right. Let me write that down, because that's a whole lot easier than traps. Yeah, really. Juicy fruit. All right. This is on record. If anybody watches this video, they're going to get an extra bonus on how to take care of gophers in their yard. What's that? Yeah. John Wright. John Wright is the man responsible for that. Send him your money. What's that? The things you learn at church. There are bonuses to meeting with the Lord's people that we can't even imagine. So David calls down destruction in verse 8. Let destruction come upon him unawares, and let the net which he hid catch himself. Into that very destruction let him fall. All right, somebody 9 through 16. Who wants to read 9 through 16 for us? All right, Will.
And my soul shall rejoice in the Lord, and shall exult in his salvation. All my bones will say, Lord, who is like thee? Who delivers the afflicted from him who is too strong for him, and the afflicted and the needy from him who robs him? Malicious witnesses rise up. They ask me of things that I do not know. They repay me evil for good, to the bereavement of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer kept returning to my bosom. I went about as though it were my friend or brother. I bowed down in mourning, as one who sorrows for a mother. But at my stumbling they rejoiced, and gathered themselves together. The smiters whom I did not know gathered together against me. They slandered me without ceasing. Like godless jesters at a feast, they gnashed at me with their teeth.
Thanks, Will. What is David letting us know at this point in the psalm, he's talking about something he hasn't talked about before.
They said when they were having a hard time, he was sorry for them,
Okay?
but they're not portraying him.
Yes. He's talking about his own character. Lord, this is how I have behaved. How has he behaved? Like he should behave. Verse 13. As for me, when they were sick, when my enemies, when the guys who were pursuing me and hurting me and chasing me, when they were sick, what did David do? He wore sackcloth. What does that mean to wear sackcloth? That was a sign of mourning. You're debasing yourself in favor of someone else. And in this case, I'm confident that he's doing that to show God. It's like a prayer, because he's going to talk about fasting here. Look what he says in verse 13 following, or the rest of it rather. I humbled my soul with fasting. And then what's he say? What's he telling us about fasting? This is the way fasting works. If you fast, and I'm not talking about fasting for weight loss or anything like that. If you fast for a spiritual reason, there's something that you're really asking God about, and to make your request more bona fide, I guess is a good way to bona fider, you fast. And so you're expressing to God, Father, I'm willing to sacrifice, to forego food, water, or whatever it is, whatever you're fasting from, in order to focus on this desire that I have for good. And when you give up food, what happens throughout the day? You think about food. But as soon as you think about food, what else do you think about? You think about the reason for your fast. Now, I've done both. I've tried fasting to lose weight. That is hard, because it's like you get to a point where it's not worth it. I don't care if I'm fat. And so I'm just going to eat a candy bar or a donut or whatever it is. But when you're fasting for a spiritual reason and you realize, oh yeah, I'm hungry, and then you realize you've got this spirit, that reason overwhelms or pushes aside all other considerations, and you are happy to go on with your fast. It's just the way it works. And so David's talking about fasting in this context, but who's he fasting for? He's fasting for his enemies. He's so concerned with their welfare that he fasts. He gives up something that he really would rather enjoy for their benefit. Verse 14, I went about as though it were my friend or brother. So what's he saying? Whoever he's fasting for is not his friend or his brother, but he's fasting for him nonetheless. Yes?
As for me, when they were sick, I'm clothed in sackcloth. Is this before they were pursuing him and chasing him, or is this?
He doesn't say, he doesn't specify, and I'm assuming it's before that, but that's just my assumption. So, as far as I know, he doesn't point out whether it's before or during, but he's talking about something that's history, and prior to that, there had been no relationship where he would say, this guy's my brother or he's my friend, because he's saying, I fasted for him before he was my brother or my friend. I bowed down mourning as one who sorrows for a mother. Is it possible to do that emotionally, to do these kinds of things for somebody you don't know? And the answer to that is yes, and you've done it. You're watching the news and you read an airliner went down, everybody was lost. Well, you didn't know anybody on that airplane, what's the big deal? And when I ask that question, you go, Marty, how could you ask that question? Nearness to God gives us a sense of value for human life, for all human life. And it doesn't matter. And if we think in a godly fashion, even about people who do evil and are punished for it with death, how much better would it have been if they had repented of their evil rather than die? That's what God says through Ezekiel. He says, I do not desire the death of the wicked. He would rather that they would repent. But if they don't repent, God has no option but justice because he is God. He can't opt out of justice. He has got to bring justice at some point. What David is doing is calling on God, bring it, Lord, bring it. I'm asking you to intervene with justice for those who have done wrong. But he's doing it, in the section we've just read, on the basis of what? On the basis of the fact that David is just. Remember we read in Ephesians about the armor of God. Tell me about the armor of God. What are some of the parts of the armor of God? Everybody thinks of the breastplate of righteousness. How is righteousness a breastplate? This is how righteousness is a breastplate. Right, your heart is there.
Well, I mean, right, your heart's in the right place, righteousness.
Yes. If you're doing what's right, then you have a spiritual protection. The breastplate, the physical breastplate, is used to illustrate a greater truth than just what the physical breastplate does. What the physical breastplate does is protect you against blows to your main body, but a spiritual breastplate, righteousness, protects you from the accusations of the wicked. Or anybody said, well, David, you're no better. Why are you calling it for God's justice against them when you're no better than they are? So what he's doing is he's implying that we have no right to call on God for justice against others if we're not making the best attempt we can to live in a righteous way ourselves. And I think about this. For 8 years, a lot of people complained about Obama. And then Trump was elected, and it's like everything switched. All right, all the people who complained about Obama are now complaining, or are now celebrating Trump, and all the people who celebrated Obama are now complaining about Trump. And it would be great to be able to say to everybody, wait a minute. If you hadn't complained so much, and I'm not talking about the legitimate complaints, I'm talking about the stuff that's bogus complaints. You read a lot of stuff, and I remember reading all kinds of, Obama did this, and Obama said that. And I, really? He's crazy if he said that. And then I do a little, he didn't say that. He said something close to that, and somebody just changed the wording a little bit and made it sound bad. And so I'd write back to people and I'd say, hey, he didn't really say that. He said, not to defend him, because there's plenty of stuff and that's what I told people. There's plenty of stuff that I think he did that was legitimate, that bears legitimate criticism, that you don't have to criticize him on the basis of made up stuff. And it's the same with Trump. There's plenty of stuff to criticize Trump for that's real. You don't have to make up stuff, but people are making up stuff. Calling him a Nazi? Really? And I wrote to some young people who were talking about this, and I said, hey, my dad fought the Nazis. He spent the last 3 months of the war in a concentration camp. And one of those little twerps wrote back and said, hey, anyway, I better not get into that, but I said, yeah, but you don't know, Marty, there's real Nazis in this country. Okay. The real Nazis are the ones who were saying, no free speech. We're going to stop these people from talking on college campuses. I don't know how much of this stuff you know what's going on. If you don't know about it, good. Let me pursue the 35th Psalm here without any more of that stuff. But what I'm saying is what's happening in reality is reflecting this. And if you tried to uphold the truth under one man's administration, even if it wasn't the truth you wanted to uphold, you upheld it, then you have every right to uphold truth in the next administration. If you failed to be honest under one administration, you don't have any right to call upon anybody else to be honest during the next administration. And so David is saying, hey, Lord, you know how I've lived. When these people who are my enemies now were sick, I mourned for them as if it was my own mother. I wore sackcloth. I fasted for them. And God would say, that's right, you did, David. Let me check into this situation. I'm going to do something about this. It's not like God needs to check into anything either. I'm just using that. It's like, I didn't know that. No, he knows. Billy? Yes, similar to
Think
that.
about it that way.
Yeah. Righteousness is a breastplate. That's what David is saying. Live righteously. Always speak the truth. Always be honest. Even when somebody's being maligned that you don't like, stand up if you know it's not true and say, wait a minute, this is not the truth. Stand up for the truth. If you don't stand up for the truth, what are you going to expect people to do when somebody's maligning you? That's what David's doing. He's standing up for the truth, standing up for justice because he has stood up for what's right. Observations, comments, questions? Don.
Since we have the complete word of God now,
Yes.
and we know that in the future David commits adultery and then had her husband killed, basically. So, yes, when I'm saying my prayer, I say, since I know the whole thing and I understand what you're saying about David, none of us are righteous like you said. So that said, when I'm upset with what somebody's doing to me, I typically say, okay, if they're not ever going to repent, just do it now.
Yeah.
But if they are, then help them do that now. I want to see it one way or the other.
Right.
But obviously, I don't always get that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But, obviously, we're looking for we want to see we're hoping for the best in that individual, even if they're trying to murder us or whether they're slandering us or whatever, or however you perceive it. But that said, that's when I'm trying to work it out. I don't like this, and I want you to do this to them. I want you to do it to them. I'm not supposed to, but I want you to. I go to the other way and say, but if they're going to repent, and just keep working with it, keep working with it.
Yeah. You don't have to raise your hand or say anything, but has anyone ever had a child that was wronged by someone else in a malicious way? And if so, as a parent or grandparent, what do you want to do? You just want to kill somebody. Yeah. You're angry, you're upset because we're humans. And we realize that when something like that is done, it may be nearly impossible for us to bring about justice. And all the while knowing we don't even really know what justice is in the first place. But David's going to God. Number one, God knows exactly what justice is. If you've been wronged, is it by somebody who really meant to do you wrong, or is it by somebody who was just having a bad day and you just happened to be the one that flipped the switch at that time? Like when somebody's got a sunburn, when I've got a sunburn and somebody, hey, Marty, how you doing? Slaps me. Oh, ah! They didn't mean to do that. They just didn't know, and sometimes that's the kind of stuff that happens. So if you're asking God, he's going to know, and he's also going to know your heart, my heart. What's Marty really asking for? Is he just ugly and hateful and vengeful and spiteful against this person, or is he really concerned about justice and about the welfare of people who are being persecuted, even if it's himself? And God has the means to bring about justice. I don't. And even if I did, I would be asking myself afterwards, did I really do what should have been done? Did I do enough? Did I go too far? We're just people. And so what the imprecatory Psalms do for me is give me an out when I see injustice in the world. I don't have to do something about it. I can call on God, and he will do something. And isn't that what he says anyway? Vengeance is whose? Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Don't take things into your own hands. Repay evil with good. That's what David is showing us here. Good. Billy?
There's a better understanding of Revelation 6 is when Marty cried out and said with a loud voice, how long, Lord, holy and true wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? We don't know the time frame that's going to happen, but we know it's going to happen.
Right.
God's going to take care of it.
And it's already
I'm like,
happened.
Don, I may want to, hey, can you just take this guy right now? If he needs help, I'll do it for you.
Right. Yeah.
But, I know that that's God's time frame for him to take care of that. He hasn't called me to do anything lately, so I say lately, but to take vengeance on anybody for his sake. But yet, we need to be justified in doing what we're doing and how we feel about God and realize he will take care of this. You may have families turn their back on you. You may have people mistreat you. You may have people may beat you up or almost to the point of death. But yet, the justice system, we know the law will take care of some of that right there, right now, by putting them in jail and persecuting them, things like that. But the final judgment is ultimately God's judgment. So
Yes. And when you look at Revelation 19, what you mentioned is from chapter 6, where the saints are calling on God. The saints who've lost their lives, the martyred saints who were under the altar, were asking God, how long until you bring about justice? Well, in chapter 19, we see justice. And who's at the head of justice? Revelation 19:11. I saw heaven opened. Behold, a white horse, and he that sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness, he judges and he wages war. His eyes are what? Flame of fire. On his head are many diadems. Now, some translations say crowns. There's two words for crown in Greek that are in the New Testament. One of them is Stephanos. That's a crown, and in English sometimes it's just translated crown, but a Stephanos is like a victory crown. You run the race and you beat everybody else, you get a victory crown. Woohoo! You're the winner. But the diadem is the royal crown, the crown of power and authority. So Jesus is waging war wearing a crown on this white horse, and his eyes are a flame of fire. He's got a name written on him which nobody knows except himself. Now there's power right there. He's the elite. Nobody knows what that name is except him. He's clothed in a robe. Tell me about that robe. Whose blood do you think? Now we might think it's the martyr's blood, but if you go back and you look at Old Testament to figure, is it Isaiah? Let me see, I'm thinking. It's the latter part of Isaiah. I love the Bible. It's just so much stuff throughout that just connects all over the place. I think it's 63:2. There was one before that. Yeah, 63. It's not just 2, but 1 through 6. Michelle got it. Isaiah 63. Who is this that comes from Edom with garments, glowing colors from Basra? This one who's majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. See, that's like what we see in Jesus in Revelation 19. It's the same kind of figure. It is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? And the answer is, I've trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. Also I trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath. And their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I stained all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, God says, and there was no one to help. And I was astonished that there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought salvation to me, and my wrath upheld me. I trod down the peoples in my anger and made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. This is God bringing vengeance. So when we read about Jesus in the Gospels, and somebody says, oh, Jesus, he's just all about love and peace and he's sweetness. No, wait a minute. Go back to Revelation 19. Look at Jesus there. He's just like us. If we are a right parent, we're going to be loving and tender and sweet to our children. But if somebody tries to do misdeeds to or hurt our children, we're going to kill them. We're going to do whatever it takes to stop them. We're going to draw blood. Nobody's going to hurt our children, and that's God looking at us. He's put his spirit in us, and he says, these are my kids. You touch them. What do you say about Abraham? Genesis chapter 12. It said, those who bless Abraham, I will bless. Those who curse him, I will curse. It is important to be on the Lord's side and the side of his people. It is important to live a just life, as just as you can. As Don pointed out, we can't be perfect, but God knows what we want to do and what's in our heart to do, and whether or not we hold his law before us as the standard by which we judge ourselves. And so that's what this is all about. John?
Revenge versus punishment. You know, we were talking last week, whatever, somebody running a red light, you know, you want them punished, or somebody that does something wrong to you.
Right.
Revenge isn't really a valid emotion to do that, is it? I mean, at least for me, I want them to punish you. You did that wrong, you know, there's no punishment. You don't see them get their punishment or justice or whatever you want to call it. So they're basically the same thing and not good, right?
Right, for us. Our motive may not be justice. When we retaliate, it may just be, well, I'm upset and you've.
You know, it's
Right.
about is it revenge or justice, punishment? Because, you know, you can't do it and nobody else is going to do it, so you're wanting God to do it because you want to see it done.
Right.
You want them to pay.
The thing with God is, he will never do anything to assuage his ego. He is not personally affronted in a personal way like we might be.
Right.
Oh, that guy cut me off, so.
Just because I'm mad at something don't mean he's mad for the same reason.
Yes, he is absolutely just and righteous, and he knows what's going on in those people's lives long before they ever did anything to us. He knows where they stand with him. He probably even knows their future if they have one, and that's what, to get into that. But he knows nothing he's going to do is going to be unjust. That's why, getting back to the original idea of calling on God, we know we can call on him and not worry about anything wrong being done. I can call the police, and the police show up because somebody's done something to me. Well, I can't say to the police, shoot that guy. And, oh, yeah, bam. Okay, is that good? Yeah, sure. That's not the way it works. There's got to be due process of law. If the police are like that, how much more is God like that? And so when I call the police, I may be calling them in a situation that could have been handled much more easily without getting the police involved, without getting the authorities involved. Because if you talk to somebody and, what's all this about? Oh, man, I'm really sorry. I wasn't thinking about what I said. I shouldn't have said that, and I shouldn't have done that. Let me pay you back for any damages I've done. That's what you want to have happen. If that doesn't happen, then you call the law. You call on God. I know the same word is used for what God does as what we do, but for us, we know it in the sense of our own egos. God knows it in the sense of absolute proper justice. That's what it is for God. For me to take vengeance, I don't know. Even when I think I know, I don't know. And when you realize that, just because you think you know doesn't mean you really know, but God knows. Art and then Judy. Right.
But God drives us to be gentle, kind, hurtful, and loving.
Yes, and that's what we need to focus on, and let him take care of this kind of stuff. Judy? Exactly. And talking about the police, when you go to Romans 7 or Romans 13, that's what God put governments in place for. to police evil. He says they do not bear the sword in vain, but it's for the punishment of evildoers and to bring about fear in their hearts so that they might not do evil. William?
We think of justice as punishing somebody who's wronged us. They need to be punished. They need something to happen to them as happened to me. But falling on the order of justice, he's fair. Sometimes justice is not to punish them. Sometimes justice is for them to acknowledge that they've done something wrong and to apologize and to make peace with what they've done wrong. And to touch on what Billy said earlier, we don't always know how long that will take for justice in our minds. I think of, for me, personal thing for me, when I was younger, I got beat up by some guy. I got jumped, I got beat up. For a long time, I wanted justice. In my mind, it was, man, if I find that guy, in an alley somewhere,
Yeah, yeah.
justice, how I felt. Well, almost 10 years later, I ran into him again, and he came to me and said, "William, can I talk to you?" Yes. And he apologized to me. He said, "You know what I did a long time ago? I'm really sorry for that."
And you said, I forgot all about that, man.
Many nights I would lay awake,
Yeah,
just boil at what unjust did. The reason why he did it was not at all right, anyways. But he had remembered that for a long time. He knew what he had done, and he wanted to apologize and make it right. You're not going to make it right, you can't fix the past, but the gesture in him acknowledging that what he had done was wrong to me and asking me to forgive him as almost 10 years later put the situation at peace. And I felt, for me in that situation, that was justice.
right.
We don't always know how God will work or how long it will take, but ultimately there was justice there, and there was peace with that particular situation. We don't know how God is ultimately going to work, but as far as treating our enemies with kindness and love, being able to forgive him and not now, when I think of that story, when I think of that, what happened to me, I hold him in a much different light, and I portray him in a much different way
Right.
than I used to. So,
Makes all the difference in the world when somebody repents. Good, thanks to it, Will. Bill?
This morning's paper, I'm sure nobody's read it. The state is just trying to decide whether to go back to gas instead of a needle. And I figure the guy that's complaining considers himself an upright guy. He wants to go in a chair, not on a cot.
Yeah, but maybe that's it, Bill. Well, if I was under pain of death, I think I'd say, just shoot me. If you want me to die, just shoot me. Give me a box of donuts first and a half a gallon of chocolate milk, and then shoot me. But chocolate milk will be going everywhere. Thank you for your kind comments and questions. Class is dismissed.